But the other point, Dana, that I wanted to make, and that is, if the issue here is that journalists, as David Gregory is pointing out, that journalists are spilling classified information, that if they are helping Ed Snowden or others provide classified information into the public discourse, that is somehow a crime, then David Gregory needs to look at possible charges for himself. Because on that very program on Meet the Press, just a few segments earlier, David Gregory talked about the FISA court and information that was classified that he had obtained through sources about what the FISA court was doing. And again, if the standard is, well, journalists should not be revealing classified information that might somehow be, sensitive to our national security, David Gregory did just that. He was doing his job a few segments earlier by having contacted sources and providing information and making it part of the public discourse so we can have a discussion about it. So if he's going to do that on Meet the Press, why on earth is he then suggesting, well, there might be possible charges for a guy like Glenn Greenwald or any other journalist who is also taking classified information and putting it in the public domain? And so I thought, the level of hypocrisy from Meet the Press was really unfortunate, and it was a shame, because I think Meet the Press is a very important institution in our media. It's very important that Meet the Press set the standard, that it stand for journalistic integrity and ethics, and that Meet the Press be a lesson week in and week out of Journalism 101. I don't think we want David Gregory Meet the Press to be a case study of how not to do journalism, or how to do interviews that are unfair, or how to posit things in question that are unfair. And unfortunately, that's what Meet the Press was on the show that David Gregory had with Glenn Greenwald.
David, I also want to jump in. I want to add that the focus on Greenwald as an advocacy journalist has been absurd. I mean, the fact of the matter is, yes, he's a crossover. He's been a blogger and a columnist for a long time at Salon. He's written many books. He also happens to be an expert in his field as a longtime attorney, and basically is acknowledged by many people on different sides of the spectrum as an authority on civil liberties and civil rights. And he was an equally tough critic under the Bush administration. I think it speaks to the fact that many of these journalists want access from the Obama administration, they want access from the national security establishment, and they're jealous of Greenwald because they didn't get to break the story. And so they're demeaning him and who he is as a person, just as they're demeaning Snowden and who he is as a person, rather than focusing on the actual brilliance of the findings themselves. I mean, the fact of the matter is, many of these journalists, as evidenced by David Gregory, claim to have no bias, claim to have that dispassion, that impartiality, but often do so in more subtle ways. Now, it worked for the New York Times, but on TV news, it often is extremely transparent. And so Greenwald puts his views out there, he puts his beliefs out there, and yet he was working with seasoned reporters like Ewan, I believe it's McDonald, and Spencer Ackerman, and Laura Poitras from The Guardian, the editors over there. The Guardian, again, also not just a news site, as the New York Times described it in a profile of Greenwald, a newspaper that has now a tremendous international digital presence. This was done, there's not a shred of evidence that this was done in a non-journalistic fashion. And to turn their guns on him, and even for him to even maintain, I would say, his cool head, though he does rip people in a personal and snarky way on Twitter, but even in that exchange, in that interview, he remained relatively patient. And I think his point about the chilling effect this has on investigative reporters is extremely well taken. And that if you do have journalists themselves going after journalists after the Obama administration has been found through the Department of Justice to be targeting people like James Rosen of Fox News for receiving classified information, which again is not a crime. To receive that passively, to leak it is a crime, but to receive it passively is not a crime. When you have journalists themselves turning on their own and not standing up in solidarity for their fellow journalists, like Greenwald and like James Rosen before him, then the profession really doesn't have any hope, and then we're all worse off. And so I think you're right, Shuster, that David Gregory should be given a chance to redeem himself, but quite frankly, I don't think he's that impressive of an interviewer normally. I think that he's much more apt to give softball questions to people in power and hardball, personal attack type questions to people that are speaking out against the establishment.